Բարի երեկո հարգելի հեռուստադիտողներ, 168 TV-ի եթերում ռևյուի հերթական թողարկումն է։ Այսօր խոսելու ենք Հայաստանին առնչվող ամենաարդիական ու ամենակարևոր հարցերից մեկի՝ հայ ժողովրդի որպես քրիստոնյա ազգի իրավունքների պաշտպանության մասին այսօրվա փոփոխվող աշխարհում սրվող կրոնական ու քաղաքակրթական պատերազմի պայմաններում։ Ուրբաթ օրը նոյեմբերի 14-ին Երևանում տեղի ունեցավ Հայաստանի Հանրապետության առաջին աղոթքի նախաճաշ միջոցառումը, որին մասնակցում էին ավելի քան 300 բարձրաստիճան պաշտոնյաներ, դիվանագետներ, հոգևոր աշխարհի ներկայացուցիչներ Հայաստանից եւ արտերկրից։ Թեմայի շուրջ տաղավարում հյուրընկալել ենք եւ կզրուցենք քրիստոնեական համերաշխություն միջազգային իրավապաշտպան կազմակերպության նախագահ Ջոն Eibner-ի հետ։ Mr. Eibner, it's a great honor to host you. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor and pleasure for me to be here with you.
You attended the prayer breakfast event in Yerevan, and also you had a meeting with His Holiness Catholicos in Holy Eshmiadzin, and you have come also to meet the attorneys of political prisoners in Armenia. Please tell us about your meetings and your impressions in Armenia in terms of, what is the situation of human rights in Armenia regarding the political prisoner that defended the Armenian church and now they are jailed?
Right. Well, as you mentioned, we were graciously invited to attend this prayer breakfast for the Armenian Republic and met with people there, chatted with those who were invited guests. We met with the Catholicos, His Holiness, and a variety of other people in the human rights world. And we're greatly concerned because there's a crisis in church-state relations. Mm-hmm. It's deeply disturbing for us when a prime minister demands the resignation of the head of the church, the strongest institution of the Armenian nation. The church is stronger than a political party. It's been there. How old is the Third Republic? Not so very old in historical terms. The church
35 years.
Yes, the church has been there for centuries, serving the Armenian people, preaching the gospel and providing other services to enable the Armenian community to exist while under various forms of persecution and oppression. And now there's a political demand that the Catholicos resign. And not only is there a demand, but there is a wide range of coercive measures that are being taken to try to force a change of leadership, including the arrests of archbishops, bishops, Samuel Karapetian, the philanthropist and donor of the church, and other people are taken into detention for questioning. Criminal investigations are being opened, and the so-called dragnet in Armenia grows. This is of great concern to us. Christian Solidarity International is a religious freedom organization, and we've been in solidarity with the Armenian nation since the time of the First Karabakh War, and we're deeply disturbed about this situation whereby the Karabakh issue is, according to the Prime Minister, closed. The people have been driven away. There has been this ethno-religious cleansing of Karabakh, and now the problem comes to Armenia itself. There's a big question mark over, will the Armenian Republic survive? And there are, and we see a process taking place of the dismantling of institutions such as the church, the historic church, to render it incapable of fully defending the national and Christian rights of its population.
And why do you think the head of the government, Nikol Pashinyan, tries to change the head of Armenian Apostolic Holy Church? Is it normal in terms of legally or morally or in any sense?
Well, no, it's actually not constitutional to use coercion. Of course, the Prime Minister can have an opinion, just like the Catholicos can have opinions. But there are coercive measures being used. The state power is being used to coerce the state into yielding to the will of the prime minister. But then you ask the question, why is it happening? Well, we know what is happening. Those are facts. I can speculate in terms of why this is taking place. And all of the evidence that we see points to the fact that there's a fundamental difference in view about how to address the Nagorno-Karabakh problem. The prime minister says it's closed. The Catholicos says, no, it's not closed. This process of persecution of the Catholicos in the church started immediately after the Catholicos was in Switzerland at a conference for the cultural heritage, preservation of the cultural heritage of Nagorno-Karabakh. And he spoke out very clearly to the international community. The people of Karabakh have the right to return. He spoke against the holding of Armenian hostages in Baku. So for the church, the Karabakh issue is not closed, and it actually cannot be closed. It might be closed for the Armenian state, but the Catholicos is the Catholicos of all Armenians, not just for the state. Whether they're Karabakhi, whether they're in Los Angeles,
the
wherever
Armenian diaspora in the
he
whole
has
world.
a responsibility to care spiritually and, as far as possible, materially and physically for the community. He cannot abrogate that right. And so this seems to be the heart of the problem, but it is not just because the prime minister and the Catholicos have a different view. We know that Turkey and Azerbaijan, especially Azerbaijan, makes demands. Azerbaijan, their leading figures, accuse the Armenian Apostolic Way of standing in the way of peace. They make this openly. I read it even in English. It's
being so-called revanchist or
and so this is what they fear. They say that Armenia stands in the way of peace, or that the Apostolic Church does. What that means is that they will not sign the peace agreement. They will not sign the peace agreement unless the Apostolic Church is rendered politically incapable of raising the Karabakh issue. They call it revanchism. So this is the demand of Azerbaijan. What we see is that the prime minister is fulfilling the demand. He will have his own reasons for it. One has to ask him why. But it would appear from the silence of Western powers that there's some kind of, at the very least, tacit acceptance. Aliyev says, power determines the future. He's very clear about this. I've read it. He says that we don't live in the days of multilateral international institutions and agreements and so on. It's power that counts. And so he's the power. He defeated, Azerbaijan defeated Armenia, and it's in a position to dictate the terms of what is a capitulation treaty. That's what is under discussion. He has not signed it yet because the Armenian government has not met all of his conditions, and we don't know what all of them are. Some of them he has made public, like the constitution has to change. The Armenian Apostolic Church and other forces that might be capable of resistance have to be politically marginalized and rendered incapable of offering any kind of resistance. So it's power that determines it, and one can say it's not right. Why shouldn't Armenia be revanchist? Well, Armenia can't be revanchist now. That's a simple fact of the matter. And the Western powers that at one time said the Karabakh issue had to be resolved on the basis of self-determination, of course also territorial integrity and non-aggression, have decided, sweep these away. It's only power that counts.
So the international law doesn't work anymore.
Well, that's what Aliyev is saying, and that seems to be the fact. That's why the Minsk group has been dissolved.
Have you met with the attorneys of the political prisoners in Armenia, including the political prisoners who came out in defense of Armenian Church, first of all, Samvel Karapetyan and the archbishops Mikhail Ajapahyan, Archbishop Bagrat Serpazan, and other clerics? What is the situation in terms of their human rights now, and what are you going to do to defend them?
I mean, yes, we have met with lawyers and other human rights specialists, and it's very clear that there have been fundamental violations of very basic human rights, that the way they have been arrested, the way trials have been conducted, and in some cases it would seem that evidence has been fabricated, and lawyers have been able to show splices and wiretaps and the communications that have been there. People have been wiretapped. There have been, this is not
legal.
This is not legal. Okay, so we know that it's not legal. The world knows that these things are not legal. People in Armenia know that it's not legal, but it happens. And that happens because of power. It's as simple as that. And of course the question arises, is Armenia a state in which the rule of law prevails, or doesn't it? I mean, Armenia, as you say, this republic is 35 years old or so. And people who are certainly my generation remember a time when there wasn't a rule of law in Armenia, in the Soviet system. Well, now we are returning to where we see similar methods are used to manage and to control the church.
I mentioned this during your press conference on Saturday in Yerevan on this topic, saying that Armenia, as you know, is not only the first Christian nation officially in the world, but probably the most suffered Christian nation in the history. And it's not about only the past, it's not only about the Armenian genocide, even before that, during the ruling of Ottoman Empire, and after that, during the first years of Turkish Republic. But it's more importantly, it's also about the present time, as you mentioned, the ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh. Right. But we don't know much about how the Christian world treat to this when observes, when see what is going on against Armenia. I mean, do we have the solidarity of the Christian world regarding that the most of powerful countries in the world are Christians?
Well, you don't have that solidarity. That's simply a fact. There was that solidarity during what I call the Great Armenian Genocide, during the First World War. That was the big genocide. But, and of course, American and European Christians all knew about what was happening, and they were shocked, and they gave so much aid. They helped so many people survive. Almost every American, after the genocide or the later stages of it, knew what was happening, and they wanted to respond out of a Christian. But the West is not, you can't really call it a Christian world anymore. It's a post-Christian world. Mm-hmm. Most people are not what we would think of as committed Christians. Christian values disappear from society, and we can see that there is ignorance and a failure to respond. We speak about the Armenian genocide, and usually we think about those years, 1915 to 1918, we call that the Armenian genocide. There are two things I'd like to say about it. One is that the process started before 1915. There were massacres in the Ottoman Empire. Sure. And I view it as an ongoing process that has not come to an end. That there have been waves of massacres and ethno-religious cleansing, and then there was the great genocide in during the First World War. But the process did not end then. It continued, especially in the Caucasus.
Because they were Christians.
Because they were Christians. This is the second thing I want. But it continues today. The most recent wave was the ethno-religious cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh. It hasn't stopped there. This process continues, and now we see that the defenses of the Armenian Republic, including the church as a bulwark of the nation, are being eroded intentionally by those powers that are the heirs of the genocide. And Aliyev is not just an heir of the genocide, he's a practitioner of ethno-religious cleansing. We see it now. I mean, it's in our time. This is not ancient history. And then, as you quite rightly say, what we call the Armenian genocide was not just an Armenian genocide. There were other communities that were destroyed at the same time or in parallel processes. Where are the Greeks of Turkey today? Where are the Assyrians or the Syriac, Aramaic-speaking peoples? They're gone. And you have the same process underway today in Syria. Mm-hmm. Syria was the home, Syria was the refuge for so many Armenians. You find security there. Aleppo was a kind of a wonderful place where people could live in peace and dignity and have their businesses and worship and have their communal life. And
many Christian communities and minorities, not only
Yes,
Armenians.
not only Armenians.
Yeah.
It was, yes, there's the Christian communities of different sorts. And then after the Arab Spring uprising, you found all of these jihadist groups targeting not just Armenians, Christians, Kufar, the infidel.
Kufar or Kafir, right.
Yes. And they are, and they were targeted. Churches were blown up, priests, Christians executed, people shot. And now these powers that were actually jihadists that had backing from Turkey and Western agencies are now in control. And the killing continues today.
Because there came the Islamist group, pro-Turkish, right?
Yes.
In Syria.
It's not just pro-Turkish, it's more than pro-Turkish. President Trump sometimes speaks some truths. You know, he just comes out with them. When he met with Erdogan recently, he congratulated Erdogan on getting getting Syria back. And he said, you've been trying for a very long time, Turkey's been trying for a very long time to regain Syria, and now you've succeeded. Congratulations. He knows very well that Mr., you used to call him Al-Jolani, now Al-Shara, is a proxy of Turkey, that the Turks manage the intelligence agencies, the key security organs of Syria today. It's not an independent state. It's an extension. It's been incorporated into Erdogan's new neo-Ottoman world. And the question now is that the future for for Armenia?
Mm-hmm.
These things are connected. Turkey, Syria, Armenia, Azerbaijan.
So you see the danger for Armenia and the Armenian Christians as an impact of today's situation in the Middle East. Am I right?
Of course, it's not something in isolation. There's not just an Armenian problem. Yes, there is a problem here. We were talking about the church problem, okay? There's a problem of church-state relations in Armenia. But that problem is connected with all of these other big issues in the whole region. It's not just a local problem. And the reason why it's so difficult to solve is because it is connected to these big problems and what the vision of the United States is for this region. The U.S. ambassador to Turkey and special envoy for Syria, Tom Brook, is something like the viceroy for this entire region. He talks about the reshaping of the region from the Mediterranean to the Caspian.
So he is the coordinator of foreign American policy.
I mean, of course, he has other people there, but yes, he has a regional. I mean, the fact that the U.S. ambassador for Turkey is also the special envoy for Syria, tells you something. That it's actually viewed as one unit, and he also has a responsibility for here too. He speaks about the nation states that were founded after the First World War as having no real legitimacy. Now that means Armenia. Armenia was founded during the war. He speaks of them in very crude terms as, well, they're just tribes that were given a flag, and the Western powers created some borders, and that they had no business really being nation states. That is a public delegitimization of the Armenian Republic as a state founded as the home, the safe haven for the victims of the Armenian genocide and their descendants. So all of this is swept away. A new Middle East is being created that is largely a matter of economy. Open borders. They're eager to have this Trump, and I'm not against the Trump corridor or whatever you want to call it, that people should be connected with each other. But we see from Azerbaijan's and Turkey's demands that it's more than just movement of people and goods. We are today having this interview in what Aliyev calls Western Azerbaijan.
It's ridiculous.
This is not, from his point of view, the Republic of Armenia. This is Western Azerbaijan.
Isn't it ridiculous? Because we never had Azerbaijan, even, before 1918 in Azerbaijan, today's territory, and never had such kind of,
It is ridiculous, but on the other hand, it isn't ridiculous. Because, again, at one time, this area was full of many different peoples. There were Muslims here, Turks, Azeris in Yerevan and around. And so what he does is he says quite openly, he makes a claim that this really belongs to them, that they are the rightful owners, that they were here, and then they're going to come back. And one of his most latest statements says, now we don't have to come with tanks, we can come with cars and trucks, we can come with civilian vehicles, because he sees a situation arising where if this process continues, money will come from Azerbaijan to buy the land, from Turkey, from the Gulf states. There will be a repopulation. Already just today we hear that there's news in the Turkish press about Erdogan demanding the opening of mosques and these kinds of things. The Grand Sheikh, whatever he's called in Azerbaijan, makes similar kinds of claims. Aliyev says, we're coming back. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, it's very clear what the agenda is. And that is that if there is something called an Armenian state, it will have to function as a vassal, as a defeated vassal of Azerbaijan and Turkey. Again, the way I view it is there is being a new kind of entity developed. I call it the Turkish-Azeri condominium. You may know this term from the 19th century when the British set up the Anglo-Egyptian condominium, which also ruled Sudan. And something similar appears to be happening now in this region. It's being reformed and reshaped, and Armenia is right in the middle of this Turkish-Azeri condominium.
Especially in this context, when we consider the attacks against the Armenian Apostolic Church, is this only some kind of domestic phenomenon, or you see some global subtext to attack the Armenian Church and Armenian nation as Christians?
No, it's not just local. This is a part of the whole global reorganization of the region. The fact that it's not local, it's not just a matter of the prime minister having an argument and a disagreement with the Catholicos. this is what is demanded by Azerbaijan and Turkey as a condition for peace. The peace agreement has not been signed yet.
Right.
So you're still operating under a ceasefire like you were years ago. And as I say, those who are desperate to have Azerbaijan sign the peace agreement will push Armenia to make whatever concessions are necessary because they believe that if this whole area is under Azeri and Turkish domination, then there will not be room for Russia and Iran. That's the thinking. That's the number one strategic goal of the United States in the West, that this area is, that Russia and Iran become weaker, have less and less influence. But this area cannot be under American control. America's too far away. America has to work through Turkey, as it does in Syria, and as it does here today.
But even if the agreement is be signed, I mean, will this bring a peace? I mean, do you see a peace when we see these screaming violations of Armenians? The Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. I mean, is this a peace?
Well, Tom Barak says that real peace is an illusion, and that peace only comes through submission. This is what he says. So one has to assume that he means that in this context, that there can only be kind of a stability if Armenia submits. That's the condition that is being demanded now, and we see the submission taking place. And we also know that how many treaties have there been in this area? There was Sèvres and Lausanne, and what do these treaties mean today? What does the Minsk agreement, I mean, these things are all swept away by power. So there's no reason to think that any treaty that is signed now is going to be honored. Why should one assume? Unless Armenia has the power to defend it. That's the question. Does Armenia have the power today to counter any violations of an agreement? I've heard nowhere any reference to any kind of guarantee from the United States, and the only guarantee that would have any value is if the United States were to say, we will intervene militarily to guarantee the peace treaty. If there's a violation, we will come in and be prepared to use force to stop such violations. Nobody talks like that.
But here he's acting as a witness, right?
Well, what is a witness? It's just okay. There have been witnesses to other treaties in the past. So people who know the history of the region and the involvement of the great powers, are aware that the signing of a piece of paper is not going to bring everlasting peace, which is kind of what they promise. I'm always reminded of the case of the Assyrians in Iraq, your neighbors in a way, fellow Christians, and many of them fought with the British during the First World War. And they had their militias in what became the new Iraqi state. And they became afraid when the British were going to come out of Iraq. And their leadership went to the British Governor General and said, please don't leave. Please don't leave us unprotected. And the Governor General said, don't worry, you will be protected by the League of Nations. And within a year, massacres. The League of Nations didn't protect them. So what kind of confidence can one have in pieces of paper or the United Nations saying that doing such things is wrong?
So your point is to be powerful and not hope that other nations or other powers will defend us?
Well, that's the only, that's the only real guarantee, is if a country can defend, if a people can defend themselves. If they can't, they of course have to make compromises. I mean, this is, you want to survive, and you have to figure out how, how best to survive. It's as simple as that. I cannot be the one to judge Armenia's capabilities for defending itself. It's not my sphere. But what I do know is that the only guarantee can come from within Armenia. It has to start with a will to survive. It has to start with spiritual strength and renewal of the Christian faith and tradition. This is really very, very important if the Armenian Christian, if the Armenian nation is going to survive, and to figure out means of self-defense and making it, not so that you're invading other people or being revanchist, but to create a situation where the cost of invasion becomes higher for the aggression than they're willing to pay, that it would be too much trouble for them.
What kind of mechanism or possibilities you see for the collective return of Armenians to Nagorno-Karabakh in near future, in any
Well, I mean, to be realistic, I can't say I see the prospect in the near future or forever, but it's not impossible, because things change in the world, and there are some mechanisms, or at least one mechanism that is there. The Swiss government has what they call the Swiss Peace Initiative. So this is on the agenda of the Swiss government. It was put there by the Swiss Parliament, and the Swiss government has a mandate to convene a forum where you have on the one hand Azerbaijan, and not the Armenian state, but the representatives of the Armenian community of Nagorno-Karabakh, to start talking to each other. Because right now there's no communication. There are the hostages. Much of the leadership have just been sentenced to what amounts to life imprisonment in Baku. And the Swiss government has a mandate to try to do this, to get them talking, just to start a conversation. That's all. Azerbaijan doesn't want to do so. And the Armenian government is not pushing this. Again, the Prime Minister says the Karabakh issue is closed as far as the Armenian government goes. But there are some signs that Western governments are thinking that it might be a good thing to have such a dialogue. But it will take some hard work. We are pressing for it. We're calling on the U.S. government to do it. We've been to Washington with representatives of the Armenian community. May be aware that the former foreign minister, Vartan Oskanian, leads a committee of prominent Armenians to represent that community abroad. So we've been to Washington with them, we've been to London, to Berlin, and this work will continue. And there are some little signs of progress, where we know that the U.S. State Department has publicly said that they have raised the issue with Azerbaijan, also Armenia. So this indicates that the issue is not actually closed. They do not say the same thing as the Armenian Prime Minister. He says it's closed. They say, no, we're talking. We're trying to talk to parties about it. We know that states have a difficult time of talking to parties that are not states, like the representatives of the Karabakhis. But of course there are back channels, there are ways to communicate. And of course, the problem doesn't come from the Karabakhi representatives, it comes from Azerbaijan not wishing to do so. So we want to try to build some kind of momentum just to get people talking to each other. And we don't know what the outcome will be. Switzerland doesn't say it has to be this outcome or that outcome. If there are these talks, then it has to be up to the Karabakhis to say the conditions are acceptable
Or not.
or they're not. If we go back, our human dignity, our basic human rights will be respected, or no, it's just impossible. Then they don't go back. But we want to try to get this conversation going where Azerbaijan is obliged to speak to representatives of the community that it has forcibly displaced, where they are displaced because of an act of ethno-religious cleansing. We believe that they should be speaking to members of that community about conditions for the return. We're not talking about borders and all of this kind of thing, self-determination, and that's not just to start talking to each other about conditions that might be created to allow Karabakhis to return to their homes.
Is that a type of genocide, the ethno-religious cleansing you're mentioning?
Well, I believe it is. Certain legal scholars, Luis Moreno Ocampo, the first chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, believes it is. There are other legal scholars who do. But the question isn't whether it legally is accepted by a court as genocide or not. People were forcibly detained. There's no question that this is a kind of an ethno-religious cleansing.
You mean in terms of the UN Convention, right, legally?
Well, if you read the UN Convention, it's clearly genocide, forcing communities out of their homeland. You don't have to kill everybody to be guilty of genocide. You have to forcibly drive people out of their homeland. That's what happened in Karabakh. So it very clearly fits the definition of genocide. But then the question is, do states in the international community say that it is? Or do they want to refrain from doing so because it actually puts an obligation on them? According to the Genocide Convention, which certainly all Western governments have signed, when they see signs of genocide, they are obliged to act. Well, they would rather not act, so they don't call it genocide. It's really as simple as that. Now, the United States is only just, some few years ago, not very long ago, I remember being in Yerevan and seeing big posters with Joe Biden saying, thank you for acknowledging not the genocide in Nagorno-Karabakh, but the great genocide 100 years ago.
Right.
So it's taken like 100 years for the United States to think, well, we can call it genocide now and we don't have to do anything about it. We have no obligation. So that's the reality of
just acknowledging the past, not about the present or something demanding from Turkey, as they mentioned.
No, they don't do it. There have been no publicly made, Azerbaijan has committed the ethno-religious cleansing of Armenian Christians from Nagorno-Karabakh with complete impunity. No punishment, no sanctions, nothing. In fact, the United States has agreed to now send them more weapons. There's a video, it was posted by Azerbaijan, of Aliyev. He was in Oxford in England, speaking to the, at that time, Swiss president of Switzerland. And according to the Azerbaijan news report, they were talking about Swiss investments in ethnically cleansed Nagorno-Karabakh. We see from that what the real
face.
What the Western policy is.
But isn't it a shame to shake his hand?
Well, I personally think it is a shame, but what one finds nowadays is that shame disappears from our culture. People are not ashamed of anything anymore. It's power and money. If you're successful, that's all that counts. And people are not ashamed.
Regarding the prisoners of war and the political prisoners being jailed, held and tortured in Baku, as you know, in Azerbaijani prisons, what could be done to release them? What do you think? I mean, we remember during the meeting in the White House on August 8th when the President Trump said to Nikol Pashinyan he's going to ask Mr. Aliyev to release them, but we don't see a progress yet.
No, so what the only way, as I see it, to achieve the freedom of these hostages is for a country like the United States to insist on it, and it becomes a part of a deal. We'll do this for you, but on condition that you release the hostages. What is telling about this situation in the White House was that Trump outsourced this job to Pashinyan. He didn't say, I'm going to tell Aliyev to release the Christians. He said, you, Mr. Prime Minister, you tell the President of Azerbaijan to release them. We don't know whether Pashinyan did ask or not ask, but what we do know is that he has said publicly that the issue is closed, so we have to assume that he is not asking. So we have to try to remind President Trump that these people are still there and expect him to do it. Now, what might happen, it might happen in Armenia, it might happen even with the hostages in Baku, that after the next elections, maybe something does happen because the Prime Minister here will be secure and that process that I spoke about will continue. So it might not be necessary anymore to arrest and investigate clergymen and opposition people and jailing and sentencing bloggers for hooliganism, these kinds of things. And maybe even Azerbaijan thinks, well, let's just get rid of this problem. Maybe not. It could be. I simply don't.
Unlike the fact that most of them now are already convicted to life sentence or 20 years.
But there's, of course, in Azerbaijan, there's no rule of law. What happens is what Aliyev wants to happen. So if he wants them he can pardon them. He can, if he wishes to, if he has a reason to do so, they can be freed. There's no rule of law. He's an autocrat, a dictator, and if he sees that it's in his interest somehow to release them, they'll be released tomorrow.
And what could you say as a conclusion, summarizing your visit? I mean, what could be done to defend the Armenian church and the political prisoners and clerics that are jailed now?
Well, Armenia is in crisis, and there's no simple solution. And we, as an NGO, we're not a government ourselves. We're very limited. All we can do is encourage the Armenian nation to remain faithful to its history, to its tradition, to its Christian faith, and to be in survival mode. Explore every possibility that there might be for being able to guarantee your own future here in your own land. That's really all I can say. I can't do it for Armenians. Armenian individuals can't do it on their own. There has to be a collective will to address this situation, to prevent what I see as a Azeri Turkification of the Armenian political system. People speak often about the pivot to the West. Well, Armenia if you look at what's happening politically with this repression, Armenia is looking more and more like Azerbaijan and Turkey than the United States or Western Europe.
And do you think we can prevent that so-called Azeri Turkification of Armenia? Do we have allies on this issue?
Well, it does not appear that you have strong allies in the international community. You will have sympathizers, but sympathizers are not allies. And even during the genocide, what we call the Great Genocide, you know, there was much sympathy in America for those that knew about it, and people did know about it. But did the United States intervene in the war to save Armenians?
No. And unfortunately, we didn't have the implementation of the Wilsonian Armenia, if you remember, yes.
Yeah, of course, there was the Wilsonian vision, there was an initial treaty, and none of that came about because at the end of the day, it was power relations that determined the future. And I cannot say 1, 2, 3, 4, do this, and that's how you survive. But I know that there are certain things that are essential for survival. And I just outlined some of them. You have to believe in a future based on your past. And that is the will to survive. The Armenian nation in the darkest times had a will to survive. The Armenian nation stayed true to its faith. And just think about it. Why don't Armenians just become Muslims?
That's a good question. Because the faith is very important for us.
Sure. There are Armenian Muslims in Turkey.
Right, the Hamshen.
They were, yes, during the genocide. Again, there's a saying that every Kurd has a Armenian grandmother. So there are people who are, ethnically, their DNA is Armenian, and they are now Muslims. They've lost their identity. They've been fully integrated into Turkish society.
And they lost their identity.
They've adopted a new one. They have a new identity. They're Turks. They're Muslims. So why not do that here? That's the challenge to the Armenian nation, because I can assure you,
what is your answer?
That is going to be what you're confronted with.
That's a good point.
That's a horrible point. I don't like to make such points, but this is the logic of the developments that we see today lead to that. That is what is required to survive. And I remember there was a television interview recently with Nagorno-Karabakh, and he was quite right
with
when he
Tucker
said
Carlson, yeah.
that the only way that Armenians could save themselves was if they converted to Islam. The question was not ethnicity. The Turks were not out to kill all people with Armenian blood or whatever, but it was fundamentally directed against Christians. And if you converted, if you became, then you could survive. And that is the big challenge of the Armenians today in their own republic, as they find themselves engulfed in a neo-Ottoman world. We know that that Turkey and Azerbaijan view an Armenian Christian political entity as a barrier to its connections with Turkic Central Asia, Muslim Central Asia, and it needs to ensure, from their point of view, that this is never a barrier again.
Thank you for the interview, Mr. Eibner, and thank you for your support to the Armenian nation. We really appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure and an honor to do so, because I'm full of admiration for Of course, I know something about the history, but I was in Nagorno-Karabakh in 1991. I was in the cellars when Azerbaijan was firing Grad missiles on Stepanakert. I was there with the women and children, and I could see the determination to survive, to remain a Christian people in their own land, and that inspires me. So it's the least that I can do to speak out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.